Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today with 27 brand new things that we learned about the Outer Worlds thanks to GameInformer's hilarious rapid fire interview. So I have broken this entire thing down, pulled out any piece of noteworthy information, and I'm going to deliver it to you in little sections as we go through the video. Let's get this started. With Microsoft purchase doesn't impact the game, about 20% of the team from New Vegas is working on the Outer Worlds. You can holster your weapons, there isn't a radio in the game, there is however a day and night cycle, and it takes place in our galaxy but a different timeline. So now let's go over each one ever so briefly. I'm not too surprised the Microsoft purchase doesn't impact this game. It seemed like it was for the future for Microsoft to have Obsidian make a exclusive game for them. I don't know if this means that, for example, the Outer Worlds 2, if that does happen, will end up being exclusive. I think Microsoft has another plan in place for Obsidian. 20% of the team from New Vegas working on the Outer Worlds. This is something that Lone and I had hammered at people for years about how a lot of the original team from New Vegas had left Obsidian over time, and now with the Outer Worlds, we're getting a rough number, a estimate at best, of how many people from that New Vegas team are currently working on the Outer Worlds. And it's amazing how much Obsidian has been able to retain their identity despite losing a lot of the staff from a game that made them quite popular. I mean, they've always made great games in my opinion, but I think New Vegas stands as the crowning jewel. Now, being able to holster weapons is nice. It's such a little touch, but I like being able to just put that weapon on the side and walk around with nothing out. It lets me get a bit more immersed. I can't say I'm surprised by no radio. If anything, I feel that would be too similar to Fallout, and in turn, it would lack a sense of identity. A day and night cycle is always great, once again, for immersion purposes, and taking place in our galaxy makes things, I guess, a bit more relatable, if anything. Next section, would love if there could be DLC worlds, would hope it hits 60 FPS on consoles, sure, to the game being supported in 4K. No idea yet about a Switch version. They're talking about New Game Plus. Their stance in modding has changed. They're looking more into what they can do for that after launch to support it for players. And lastly is character creator has different heads than sliders for customization. So this one is easily the juiciest section in my opinion. I love the idea of DLC worlds coming to the Outer Worlds. I think the idea Obsidian has gradually grown attached to is so long as this game is successful, we're going to see a lot of things that are missing from this game be addressed in future content. And I'm talking things like, I'd imagine romance will be a thing added. I also feel like the DLC worlds are something that a lot of people are already expecting and seems like the most logical place for Obsidian to head with that. Hoping to hit 60 FPS on consoles, I do find a bit surprising, but I do imagine it's probably the Xbox One X and PS4 Pro versions, and we'll see a performance version and a graphics version like a lot of games do nowadays, which I think is great because now console users are starting to receive more agency on how they want to play the game. Do they want to prefer 60 FPS, or do they want to see if they can get that 4K experience, which Obsidian seems to actually be supporting. Now, a Switch version for this game would destroy my life because I am obsessed with my Nintendo Switch. It's probably the console I've played the most since it has actually come out right next to my PS4. If pretty much my most anticipated game were to drop on the Switch, which I just love laying in bed and playing my Switch, man, okay, that would be a game changer. Let's hope that it eventually does happen, though, for those folks who are only owning a Switch. Now, talking about New Game Plus, I'm a little surprised that's not already in the game, but this does sound like one of those exciting things that comes a week or two after launch saying, hey, you can pick that character that you just beat the game with and hop back in if they time the announcement just right, or maybe it's something that launches with the game. Nonetheless, I'm glad that they are considering it. It would be interesting to see you carry over perks, but also flaws. I think some people are wondering why it's not already in the game, and I think it's for balance purposes to some extent. But more relieving than anything on this list is their stance in modding actually changing. Modding is so crucial, and I think it's a big reason why Fallout New Vegas is as popular as it is even to this day. It keeps games relevant for so much longer, and I'm sure Obsidian as a business sees the value in trying to find a way to allow player-created content to get into their game because it just constantly keeps the game in the news cycle. I mean, for God's sakes, we're seeing so many trailers for big New Vegas mods still popping up to this day, and we still have Fallout 4, which you'd imagine would replace New Vegas at some point, but some people just love New Vegas and the way it mods, so I'm sure Obsidian sees the value in trying to make that work. Next slide, you can name your character during that customization section, but you're usually called boss or captain by your companion. There isn't power armor in the game, but there is heavy armor, so it's not a full-on sealed power armor, but there is a heavier version of armor. There isn't a morality system, but there is reputation. They're unsure if you can beat the game by killing nobody, but you can get through the game killing everyone. And lastly, you can join factions. So the morality system to me is the most important aspect, because what will happen is you could have a situation like Fallout 3 where there is a morality system, and while it's great on paper to have that good karma, bad karma system, especially back then when open world RPGs were in their infancy and it was hard to add a lot of choice to those style of games, but what would happen is you'd steal something and you lose the same amount of karma as shooting somebody, and you'd get good karma for things that maybe you morally didn't agree with. And it seemed like the game depicted to you, the player, in questing and whatnot, what made you good and what made you bad, instead of leaving it up to the player and having people, the characters they craft, which they can control, react to situations based off their personalities and how they feel about it and how civilization in that part of the world feels about it. That's something I personally prefer more over a morality system. I do like morality because it shows there's a focus on the good and evil, but still, reputation in general, very good that that is the primary focus. Now, they do say you can join factions, but to me, I feel that's kind of obvious since the game is really based around a bunch of corporations, and I imagine over time we kind of ally ourselves with it. It seems like the narrative structure in the terms of all these big corporations, and you probably eventually try to side with one of them, is similar to the Strip in New Vegas, where you can take it one of a number of ways: the Legion, NCR, Mr. House, and so on. Or you can probably go it by yourself and say screw these factions and find a way to the ending without anybody's help. Now, some very important companion information. You don't need to have companions. Companions will go unconscious during combat, but you can lose them permanently in the supernova difficulty. Companions can't blow your stealth, and you can't control or tame creatures. Also, no boss fights, but there are side encounters with more difficult individuals. So let's stick on boss fights for just 1 second, because they wanted to further clarify their stance in the interview on how they felt boss fights were, because they described it as multiple layers of new combat mechanics that you haven't seen in the game anywhere else, but you're seeing in that specific boss fight, which is how I would personally describe it. You're approaching something entirely unique and different from the rest of the experience. So it doesn't seem like the Outer Worlds is going to have something like that, but they did say, as I mentioned earlier, side encounters with more difficult individuals. I imagine that means enemies with more health. But I am freaking fired up that companions cannot blow my stealth. Thank the Lord. I cannot stand when a companion crawls out of a bush and they're like, hey, I'm right here, and they give you away. I know it can be a bit immersion breaking for some when a companion's sitting right in front of an enemy and they're just not reacting to it until combat engages, but holy crap, it is so annoying when your demise is met because your companion, who you cannot control, did something silly. Supernova difficulty continues to get more and more interesting, where originally we had learned how you can have an increased number of flaws be added into your experience, up to 5, and now companions die permanently. This sounds like a super exciting mode that I'm definitely going to want to make a second run through, especially since the focus of the game is going to be on narrative choice and consequence, and then we're seeing also a difficulty that really alters the experience when you go through that time. I think I'm definitely going to want to give that a run. But it's also excellent for those of you who want to lone wolf it. You don't want a companion. Maybe you don't find the characters interesting. Maybe this is an experience that tailors to you, and boom, you don't got to have those companions on your back. Last little chunk of the list: 24 flaws. There will be slides at the end showing you what happened, and one solid write-up and a couple of ideas for an Outer Worlds sequel. Lastly is a guaranteed 2019 release, so we shouldn't really expect a delay for this game because they seem very confident when they said yes, it's definitely coming out in 2019. Some may be wondering, what does the 24 flaws mean? Well, I was talking about flaws earlier in this video, and basically what they are little quirks you get, but they can also, upon accepting them, give you a bonus perk. So you can keep up to 3 in what would be a normal difficulty playthrough, which I imagine a lot of us are going to be going through. And knowing that there's 2 dozen means that there's a lot to miss in that section, a lot of things that you can take in to be afraid of, whether it's arachnophobia or robophobia, as they've mentioned before. There's fear of fire. I imagine any type of damage in this game will be something you can be afraid of, because then it impacts the gameplay experience. Obviously, the standout in this final part of the list is that there will be slides at the end showing you what happened, very much akin to Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. As you go along your adventure, you reminisce on choices you made, how things could have gone differently, and it is such a good way to cap off a RPG choice-driven game. Thank you, Obsidian, for clearly understanding your audience and the products you are working with. But that is 27 brand new things that we learned about the Outer Worlds through this rapid fire interview. I hope you guys enjoyed and took something away from this. Some of this was stuff we already knew, with a little bit of additional layers of information tossed out there. So I once again would love to hear from you guys in the comments down below. Do fire away. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Do consider supporting that, as it fuels all the content I create here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.